I spoke with my uncle about his story and made necessary changes based on what he told me, which changed some minor details, but I wanted it straight from him. I also decided to add two small stories of my own, which, on their own, aren't great admittedly, but they're here for those who want to hear them. For this first story, I still get chills thinking about it. It's not my story, but the fact that my uncle said this happened floored me. He is the last person in my family I'd expect to hear this from, because he's a no-nonsense kind of guy. Paranormal experiences were the last subject I'd ever think would come from him. My cousin relayed this story to me, and I followed up with him to verify everything. This was a long time ago, somewhere around the 70s, so some details were fuzzy. So my uncle had a married friend that he hung out with on occasion, and they usually drank beers, watched football, your usual guy time stuff. One day he's over at his friend's house watching a football game. The friend's wife is in the kitchen and occasionally makes small talk with him. His friend is off somewhere outside or away from the events that played out. At one point, my uncle is on the couch, relaxing, and watching the football game. He's in that state where you're just absent-mindedly watching TV and casually paying attention to the environment. Out of nowhere, a figure of a young man in blue jeans passes in front of my uncle, between him and the TV, and turns right into the hallway that leads to the bedrooms. My uncle doesn't think much of it, other than, oh, someone else is here. He chalks it up to someone that was invited. Not long after, something breaks him from his state, probably a commercial or something. He turns to the friend's wife and asks, "Hey, who's over here?" "What?" she responds. "The guy that just passed in front of me in blue jeans." "What are you talking about?" she asked. "I saw him just a moment ago. He passed right in front of me and turned down the hallway into the bedrooms." His wife gets this weird look on her face, then calls loudly for her husband. The husband comes either from upstairs or inside the front door. "What are you yelling about? Something wrong?" "Tell him," she says. So, my uncle relays what he saw to his friend, and his friend goes, "What are you talking about? There's no one else here." The wife gives him this look like she wants him to say something, and he's looking back like, "What?" "Well, tell him already," she insists. "He doesn't need to know about that." "Was he a young guy?" the wife asks my uncle. "Yeah, he looked young. Had a t-shirt on, I guess a plain shirt with no writing or anything." It's at this point that my uncle realizes that the person wasn't completely solid. He wasn't exactly transparent, and he wasn't a shadow, but it's hard to explain. He was a figure that resembled a young man. So his friend, now looking a bit freaked out, tells him that a young man used to rent this house way before them, somewhere around the 50s, and for one reason or another, shot himself in the head. The bullet even ended up lodged in the roof of the home. Even more eerily, the man had shot himself in the back bedroom, the same area my uncle saw him walking towards. I've remarried by now, but for the second story, this happened on the honeymoon with my first wife. We went to Charleston, South Carolina, and it was a great decision. The old wrought iron fences and cobblestone streets were so historic and interesting. So being a fan of ghost stories, I decided we'd do a ghost walk one night. We do the ghost walk, and they're telling us interesting stories and showing spooky locations. We're having a good time, even kind of laughing at details like, "Oh yeah, I bet they saw something," just being giggly newlyweds. So, we get to this part in the tour, where there's this story about a struggle in an alleyway where one man killed another with a knife over some owed money or something of that nature. After the story, they add that every once in a while, along with the sightings or noises in the alleyway, people in their tour groups have experiences. They'll feel a burning sensation on their leg and will find a cut there as if someone sliced them with a knife. We looked at each other like, yeah, sure, they probably had one too many drinks. It's a spooky tale, but I don't actually believe in ghosts and don't take it seriously. So, we're going along further into the tour, and I feel an itching sensation on my leg. I figured a mosquito got me because I'm a magnet for those horrible things, and I scratched it. It didn't feel good after I scratched it. It actually got more of a burning sensation, almost like they describe people in tour groups did. I'm not psyching myself out, I said inwardly. I know the mind can play tricks on you, and I wasn't going to fall for that. So, I ignored the feeling. Maybe just a muscle cramp from walking around all day. Who knows? We finish up the tour, and I'm ignoring it, but it's in the back of my mind. We got back to the hotel, and I decide to at least look at my leg, because maybe I scraped it on something and didn't realize it. I kid you not. There's a red mark on my leg in a straight line. It didn't exactly resemble a cut, more like something rough maybe scraped up against my leg. It's not bleeding, but the skin is very obviously irritated. So, I'm a bit freaked out, but I brush it off. The next morning, the mark was barely visible. This third story is short but sweet. I worked for a company that took customer service calls for DirecTV. Because I did well, they placed me in the new customer department. It wasn't a great job, but it beat working in collections as I did before, which was the absolute worst. Anyway, part of taking new customer calls means sometimes you get people who want to move their service. I got this call one day, and this guy wants to move his service. All I do from there is get some basic information to jot down and pass him on to the other department. So I'm chatting with him casually, trying to warm him up for the next caller. And I ask, "So, is there a reason for the service being moved that I can notate?" "Well, it's because we had to move somewhere else." "I'm sorry to hear that. I hope everything goes well for you." "Oh, we're moving to a better place, that's for sure." "Why's that?" So, the customer proceeds to tell me that I may or may not believe him, but his apartment he moved to recently is haunted, and they're moving because they can't handle it. Really? Wow, that's so wild. If you don't mind me asking, what kind of stuff is happening? Apparently, one of the rooms would inexplicably have music coming from it, like from the 1940s, and it even sounded like it was played on a record player. No one would be in there, and they'd hear voices talking, like they were having a conversation. If they went in to investigate, whatever was happening would stop. I told him how that was creepy, and I would be moving too if something like that happened, and I transferred him to the other department. I believe him. Anyone could easily say he's lying to maybe get a free service move or something. But here's the thing. If you wanted your service moved for free, why would you make up something that sounds so implausible? You could have 1,000 reasons for moving that would be better received than a haunting. So he couldn't have told me for that reason. Besides, I'm not even the department that moves service to other locations. Wherever he is, I hope I never end up somehow moving there.
Mannequins are creepy. As a security guard, there was one night shift where my best friend and I were working together, continuously with earphones in, chatting with each other. Now, to get a clear view of this, I must explain something. We had different routes to buildings we had to check up on, and somehow we had a customer that was right in between the two routes. Considering we had to do a checkup round 3 times during the night, I would take the first and the last round. My friend would fit in the one in the middle. The school consisted of multiple buildings together. For the checkup, we had to do a circle around it and go inside each of the 5 buildings to arm the alarm systems. First, I did the full round before arming the systems, so that if there was an open window or something, I could quickly close it. Saves the hassle of having the alarm trigger falsely. Small note: The school consisted of multiple education departments, one being a hairdresser school. All buildings had 4 floors. The school itself wasn't necessarily in the middle of a populated area, but rather surrounded by sports fields. So, on the backside, with the severe lack of lighting, this wasn't the favorite place of people. It was a huge open space, so yes, you could see a lot. But thanks to it being so badly lit, you could only use your flashlight to see the area you point at. So, I am walking my round, and I'm at the backside of the 3rd building when I look up and see there are creepy mannequins in the only lit classroom on the top floor. But I knew there were these mannequins in the building for it being a barber school, and from what my friend told me, there were some fashion lessons. Now, what made it so creepy is that out of 5 buildings, everything was pitch black, including the fields around it, and the one room with lighting had these wooden-looking mannequins staring straight out of the window. I was creeped out immediately since I felt like they were watching me. While on the phone, I tell this to my friend, send him a picture via WhatsApp, and hear him laugh, confirming what I already know. I must go inside now to turn off the light there. So, it not being my favorite location, I headed inside anyway with my friend talking some courage into me, and headed to the top floor. I am not the biggest fan of elevators, so I just quickly run up the stairs and reach the 4th floor. Almost all schools here have little windows near the door to the hallway, so it was pretty easy to find the one where the light was turned on. I rushed over, just quickly opened the door, and reached with my hand around the corner for the light switch. This goes automatic after a while in security under high workload. But before I turned it off, I noticed that there is not a single mannequin in the room. Now, it wasn't uncommon to rush in too quickly and not notice a second room being lit, but I was pretty damn sure there was only one. Luckily, I took a picture and sent it to my friend so I could look back to confirm what I was already pretty sure of. It was the only lit room on this side. I told this to my friend when he told me to get the hell out of there. I turned off the light and rushed out of there. I armed the alarm system and concluded the first round. A couple of hours passed, and my friend went there for the second round. This time he didn't need to enter the building but just to make rounds. While on the phone, he asked me with a bit of a surprised voice what building it was. I told him, and he told me to check WhatsApp. I am not going to lie, the picture scared me somehow. He sends the same angle, the same picture, the only difference being that the mannequins are now 1 floor lower, standing in front of the window in a lit classroom. At this point, we decided to go check it out together. So, the 3rd round, we would do together, finish up the rest of our rounds, and go back. We come back together, and the first thing we decide to do is a circle in the car. He steps in mine while I drive around the buildings. The same light from the second round is still on with the mannequin standing there. At this point, we decided that someone must be playing a joke. We phoned the alarm central. They can see whether someone turned off or turned on the system, and at what times. The last one to touch the system apparently was me. We tell them that we are shortly turning it off to fix a light that wasn't turned off. We headed inside and agreed to map where any mannequins would be, all while staying close to each other. We first went to the lit room and found the mannequins there. This time they were at least still standing. We wrote down the number of the classrooms we checked and found a total of 3 rooms with mannequins, not a single one being on the top floor anymore. After a while, the feeling that we were not alone crept up on us, and we decided to head out. We had a night shift the night after with the same routes, so we agreed to return the following night. I will write that down in the next post, as it would surprise me if some people read all the way down here, considering how long this has become. Every summer,
I go camping in Yosemite with my cousins, and every trip we spend a night stargazing. There's a village with markets and restaurants down the road from the campsites, and across the road from the village is a large field of tall grass with a winding, narrow boardwalk that leads deep into the field. Imagine a boardwalk dock that reaches out into a bay, but instead of open water, it's a field surrounded by towering trees. This is where we usually sit to watch the stars. This night of stargazing was uneventful as the sky was cloudy, and we couldn't see the stars at all, so we just sat and smoked for a bit. One of my cousins noticed a light deep within the woods that was still and bright. He pointed it out because he thought it was odd that there was a light in that direction to begin with, as that area of woods had no buildings or campsites, which meant that there shouldn't be people in that area, as it was very late by this time. We moved closer toward that area of the woods along the boardwalk, and were able to see that the light was twinkling. It looked as though the light came from a flame. It's strict in the rules of any wooded national park that you shouldn't light flames in areas that don't have a designated fire pit. My cousin was certain that where the light was coming from was empty, with open woods, and was well out of distance from any campsites, roads, and housing. The flame must have been very deep into the woods, because no matter how close we got along the boardwalk, the light wasn't becoming any clearer to make out. We stopped when we heard commotion, as though a large group of people were there. We assumed that there must have been a party going on until we heard chanting. It started as loud party sounds, but slowly turned into synchronized whooping and then howling. Not like a wolf howl, but more like harmonized groans and wailing. The voices became more guttural and projected, almost as though the people making them were in pain or misery. The sounds we heard were no longer ignorable, and it was obvious something odd was happening in those woods. Before I knew it, I was the only one closest to the end of the boardwalk when I turned around and saw all my cousins standing back, huddled far behind me, staring with me into the trees. My heart was racing, and all there was to see was that light twinkling deep in the dark. The faint sounds of wailing were enough to know that whatever was going on around that light wasn't a party. The next morning, my cousins and I ventured into the woods in the general direction of where we saw the light, and sure enough, it was empty woods in every direction for an acre or two. No sign of camps or cabins. The only evidence of any people being there was a large patch of dirt and pine needles, where we found masses of bare footprints left in the mud and soil.